Hi folks, I'm Jack Kennedy and welcome to week 7 of Farm Tech Talk. At the outset, I'd like to acknowledge the support of our sponsors MSD Animal Health, FBD, Ornua and Board BIA. I'd also like to say that we have a separate livestock show for those that are interested in rush management, the forgotten fertilizer, and we take a deep dive into dairy costs. That program was live on Friday night, so tune into farmersjournal.ie if you want to watch that. For this particular show, I'm joined by Justin McCarthy, Adam Woods, and Pat O'Toole, our news correspondent in the sunny southeast. Pat, if I was to come to you first, you have a keen interest in all things politics, and you had a good few pages on that piece in the Journal this week. And maybe you might just summarise for us, I suppose what's in the Journal and where the various political connotations are at the moment.
Well, Jack, this week was really all about the Greens and their 17-point programme for government, or their 17-point response to the framework document that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael had put to them and put to all the parties who are possibly potential coalition partners. But it's really all about the Greens, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael at the moment. The big issue for farming is the 7% year-on-year reduction in emissions, which the Greens are demanding. It's a red line. It's the first point they put forward. It's a very deep cut, and it would have significant implications for farming. So what we did was we talked to Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil TDs, and we asked them, rural TDs, their opinion on this, because they've been really quiet. They've been leaving it to some of the independents to take the lead on standing against the Green Party's position. And the danger is that we'd slide into a government which had a very extreme position on the future of agriculture. So we thought it was important to poll them, and they were quite outspoken. They are pretty much across the board defending Irish farming, defending things like live exports, like the nitrates derogation, and opposing any reduction in the national herd, which is compulsory. So I think it was important to get them on the record. We also talked to Pippa Hackett, the Green Party TD. Amy Ford interviewed her at the weekend, and we also analysed the response from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who came back again on Wednesday morning with their response to the Green Party. And we talked to Dennis Nocton, who's one of the leaders of the most significant, he's the convener of the most significant of the independent groupings. They have 8 votes. So they would be significant potential partners in government. So it's a moving picture, but farming has to be very watchful that we don't get sold down the river in this policy negotiation.
Okay, hold it there, Pat. I'll come to you in a minute again. But Justin, maybe just to kind of flick to you. I mean, you make the point in your editorial this week that, the Greens are taking the limelight while farmers are in the red. I suppose, why are the Greens' demands so important for farmers in rural Ireland?
Look, I think Pat alludes to a lot of it there, and his coverage in this week's paper teases it out. I think fundamentally the problem here, Jack, is if you layer a 7% demands over, as Pat talks about, the Greens' very open and public demands around the future of the national livestock herd, live exports, and indeed the nitrates derogation, there's very, very serious threats to the agricultural sector from a lot of what the Greens stand for. And I suppose what we wanted to do in this week's paper was bring Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil into that debate in terms of where they stood on that, because it has very serious implications. And I think there's positives and negatives to what we've seen. I think one of the big positives is that, as Pat reports this week, that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have accepted that that livestock emissions should be treated differently in terms of the whole emissions profiling. What it revolves around is biogenic methane, where it's emitted from the animal, and a lot of it is actually then absorbed from the atmosphere back into the growing plants and into the soils. And I suppose that is one big area, Jack, that is often overlooked in terms of the agricultural sector. And I think Lorcan Allen covers it in great detail in this week's paper in terms of research from AFBI that actually shows that Irish grasslands, on a conservative basis, could be sequestering around 11 megatons of carbon every year in the soils. And obviously, as part of the livestock, is actually a very important part of that livestock that allows soils to actually do that. And the sector is given no credit for that whatsoever. And to put it into context, the 11 million or the 11 megatons of carbon would be equivalent to about 40% of all the emissions from the agricultural sector. So not to be given any credit for that is a huge issue. And that's why in the editorial this week, we refer to, well, if there is going to be a 7%, effectively a doubling of the current targets, well, then it needs to be aligned to a complete overhaul of how the methodology is used to calculate emissions from the agricultural sector, and that should obviously be around net emissions, which take account of carbon sequestration and takes account of the whole biogenic methane life cycle system.
Okay, Pat, again, to come back to you, I mean, on the politics side of things, you had a piece with Dennis Naughton, I suppose, suggesting that the Greens' demands were untenable. And I heard Simon Coveney, subsequently to the journal being published, again, I suppose, reiterating that the Green demands were untenable. What do you see happening in the coming weeks?
It's significant that those two people, because you've got to remember, Simon Coveney is a former Minister for Agriculture, an environment spokesperson in opposition. Dennis Naughton, a previous Fine Gael agriculture spokesperson back in over a decade ago. But more recently, he was the Minister for the Environment and in the last government. And he has studied all the figures, and he's quite adamant that 7% is just impossible. I mean, he said that if you were to take every animal, not just cattle, slaughter every animal in the national cattle herd, but also every sheep, every pig, all the poultry, you still wouldn't reach the 7%. If you parked up every privately owned car, that would only achieve the 7% for 14 months. And remember, these are progressive cuts, so you cut by 7% this year, you have to cut by 7% of that smaller figure the next year, so it gets harder and harder and harder. So I think the significance is that the Green Party on their own would not be the most stable government partners for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, because every single Green Party TD seems to have a different opinion on every single issue, especially farming. So the likelihood is that along with the Green Party, they're going to want independents, people like Dennis Naughton, or perhaps the Labour Party with independents as government partners. And it's very important that they speak out now. Also, in terms of the public opinion, it's very important that the views of Eamon Ryan, which can be eccentric, don't go unchecked, that someone like Simon Coveney or Dennis Naughton stands up and says, hold on, that's just not acceptable, that's not possible, that's not doable.
I mean, do you see this process going in the next 2 or 3 weeks, kind of, or is it a 6-week play in terms of when we might actually see some light in terms of real solid government formation talks?
For a government to be formed, there'll have to be face-to-face talks. They're very difficult at the moment. Those little one-to-ones, those chats over a cup of coffee, teasing out difficult issues, flattening wrinkles, they can't really happen at the moment. You're talking about four-way conversation, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. A lot of Fianna Fáil grassroots reacting negatively to the idea of teaming up with Fine Gael. And remember, both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are committed to polling their own members before they go into government, and they need a majority. The Green Party actually need 2/3 of their party members to endorse a programme for government. So we're a long way from seeing a government formed yet. I would think we'd be doing well to get a government in June. The way things are going.
Okay, good man. Leave it at that for a minute, Pat. I'll be back to you. I mean, Adam, if I was to come to you, one of the big stories this week, I suppose, is the impact of the COVID on meat processing facilities. Can you just maybe summarise kind of what has happened in the last week and what's happening as we speak today, Friday, and will happen over the weekend?
Yes, Jack. So we've seen the announcement this morning that Dawn Meats are closing their boning facility in Kilbeggan in County Westmeath. That's as a result of 4 cases of COVID within workers. It represents about 2% of the workforce within that facility. And I guess we've had issues in other facilities as well, and other processors. And I guess it's the nature of the business. Inside these factories, people work in quite close proximity. And especially in boning halls and we'll say in packing plants, there really is quite close contact there. So it's quite hard to maintain that 2 metre distance. And we've seen, I suppose, the Dawn Meats as the first processor to close the facility. Others have been able to keep going. We've seen Veterinary Ireland come out this week, and the President, Conor Geraghty, saying that he'd like to see more testing in place at processors, more contact tracing, more temperature testing going in. So they feel that there isn't enough going on at the processors. The processors come back to us, and it's in the paper this week about, I guess they've been working with HSE and they're following HSE guidelines, but it's very, very difficult in some of those situations to stay away from COVID impacting the business.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the vets there in your piece. I mean, just remind us, I suppose, what role the vets play in that whole meat processing piece.
Yeah, so I guess there are a number of vets, we'll say, work on the line on a daily basis in terms of quality control, in terms of food safety, and also in terms of animal disease. So they're positioned at a number of different points along the line. I suppose I should have said, Jack, that in terms of our capacity at the moment, there are some concerns out there that this, would say, factories closing will lead to, farmers not being able to get cattle killed. That is not the case at the moment, because we're operating on a kill of 25,000. We have the capacity in this country to kill 40, 50,000 cattle. And it's actually, that small kill is leading to maybe a positive in terms of factories and in terms of abattoirs that are killing cattle, because we can space out those animals, or our factories can space out those animals on the line. They can slow the line right down, and they can space out the individuals that work on the line. So it certainly shouldn't be an issue in relation to getting cattle killed. On the other hand, demand, that's where the real issue is at the moment in terms of over the last couple of weeks. Food service demand has fallen off, and in general, meat demand has fallen off. So that's where the real issue is at the moment.
Okay, I mean, has the impact of the meat processing and the COVID relationship there, has that impacted on the factory trade this week?
Yeah, a little bit, Jack. We've seen McDonald's make the announcement. We broke that story last week in terms of getting their supply chains in order, I guess, before they go to open. That they plan maybe open mid-May, but they want to make sure that their supply chain is robust and that everybody, all their ducks are in a row, I guess, coming up to that opening point. And one of those, obviously, is beef. McDonald's are the largest buyer of Irish beef, and we've seen, we'll say, some more appetite in the south, especially with factories that are sort of aligned to McDonald's in terms of burger processing. A little bit more appetite there for cows. And we're seeing cows will be up maybe 10 cents there in the last week. So definitely it's moving in the right direction. We're nowhere near, Jack, where we need to be as regards profitability in the beef business. But definitely it's moving in the right direction. And all, we'll say, intelligence, or our market intelligence would suggest that May and June will be 2 tight months for beef. So hopefully we'll see more increase in the coming weeks.
Interestingly, this week, JBS, one of the largest purchasers of meat in the US, warned consumers of looming meat shortages. Our agribusiness editor, Lorcan Allen, compiled this report for Farm Tech Talk. Have a listen to this.
US farmers are facing a horrible scenario of having to euthanize millions of pigs, chickens, and even cattle after COVID-19 forced the closure of up to 20 meat processing plants across the US. Despite implementing measures such as temperature screening and social distancing, almost all of the largest meat companies in the US have been forced to shutter plants in recent weeks after employees contracted the deadly virus. It's believed as much as 30% of the pork processing capacity in the US has now been lost, and that 100,000 pigs that should be slaughtered each day now have nowhere to go. The unfolding crisis prompted Tyson Foods, the largest meat company in the US, to take a full-page ad in the New York Times this week to warn consumers that farmers will be forced to euthanize millions of animals due to the closure of these plants. Tyson warned that food supply chains are breaking, and there could even be shortages of meat on US supermarket shelves as a result.
Justin, if I come to you, it was interesting to see that Lorcan piece in terms of the US and the severe impact it's having. Is there a danger that, those meat shortages that the US talk about in the US will impact on the European piece and the Irish piece, I suppose, subsequently in coming weeks?
Jack, it's actually such our international markets and how international markets actually function. One of the flip sides of that is somebody else's problem can be somebody else's opportunity. And at the end of the day, as a major beef exporter, exporting the majority of our beef, albeit into Europe, global beef markets do have an impact in terms of the demand for Irish and Irish prices. So a lot of what Lorcan actually talks about there, if there is a severe tightening in the US market, like we do have access to the US market now for Irish beef, there could be potential actually in that, in terms of to create that demand, and the demand that Adam refers to could come at a time when cattle supplies are actually a little bit tighter. So such are the vagaries of international markets. Somebody else's problem can be somebody else's opportunity. The extent to which that actually applies to Europe is unknown. We're not picking up a lot of it across Europe at the minute. I think some of that would be to do with, in terms of the structures of beef processing and meat processing in Europe compared to the US, where the plants tend to be a lot bigger and there's a lot more confinement. If you take here, as Adam referred to in Ireland, Jack, we're killing 25,000 cattle a week. Look, if you go right back to the McKinsey report of many years ago, I think it was up to 70,000 cattle we would have the capacity to kill here every week in Ireland if we needed to. So, look, we do have a lot of capacity. Whilst there are challenges, I think the overall, the beef processing in particular, maybe the pigs are obviously slightly more challenged, but certainly in beef processing in particular, we have a lot of spare capacity in Ireland. And I would highlight on the Kilbeggan side, the Kilbeggan factory that Dawn has is quite different than a lot of beef processing in Ireland, in that it's a standalone boning hall. Most boning halls are on the same site and located right beside a meat processing factory. So in fairness, with the kill down 20-30%, the pressure that would have been on Kilbeggan as just a standalone boning hall wouldn't have been that severe, and probably the decision to close it with such a small number of COVID cases was probably, there was a commercial reality there as well in terms of making the decision.
Justin, the front page story this week is Marts poised to reopen. Is it important to get the Marts up and going now at this stage? I mean, we've seen throughput, I suppose, under the current restrictions, we've seen throughput for some of the Marts at 10 and 20% of what normally is. I mean, is there a backlog of cattle backing up that need to be moved?
Cattle have moved, Jack, and positive for guys selling at the minute. The trade has held up well, as Adam and the guys have been reporting, in terms of good, strong trade for grass demand. And I think through all of this, one thing that we don't talk enough about is how fortunate we are that the weather has been so favourable to farmers, whether it be planting corn, getting cattle out to grass, or whatever the case may be. Like if you went back a couple of years ago when we were in a fodder crisis, if you had that layered over the challenges at the minute, it would have been a very, very difficult period. But the weather has really played ball, has filtered into the trade. Certainly, Jack, a transparent auction system is a very important part of setting the cattle trade. And I think we do need to get the marts back open, but we do need to get them open in a way that does protect the farmers that are going into the marts to trade, and indeed those working in marts. So look, our intel would tell us that there is good progress being made on getting the marts back open, but it does have to be in a way that's sustainable and that does protect public health.
Okay, so that's a nice wrap now in terms of the politics and where we are and the beef factories and that story that's ongoing, and both stories are ongoing and will be covered obviously in the coming weeks. The other big story, I suppose, to hit the headlines this week was oil prices. And so as the airplanes and the trucks and the businesses have closed down, oil prices have crashed. And there always has been a strong correlation between oil prices and milk prices. So, I mean, this week I said we'd put a call into the managing director of Ornua, David Butler. He's the managing director for the Middle East and Africa. So he's right in the heart of it in terms of oil country and the impact that it has on that particular region. So I put it to him in terms of how will the impact of that oil business impact on dairy demand in the region? Let's hear what he had to say.
Look, there's no getting away from it, Jack. It is a cause for further concern. That said, we've been through this, I mean, we talked earlier about the investments we made in 2015, and that was around another oil price collapse. It will again impact markets differently. Some markets will struggle more than others, and our diversity of risk in terms of the different places we're in has probably one way of managing the risk that a shock in oil price brings. So one market may suffer and other markets may do okay out of it. Through 2015 and through the oil price collapse, our business grew. So these long-standing relationships we have with distributors and customers going back numbers of years will see us in good stead to tackle through this. But look, as soon as some of the big importers of oil, so be it in Asia or other parts of Europe, as soon as they open up, that will give a much welcome boost to the oil price. But for now, it remains a challenge. But one, look, we've faced in some degree in the past, and we'll do the same this time.
Does it make it a more competitive pricing play in that region, or does it make it a substitution play? As in, will people that were using a dairy ingredient switch into a vegetable ingredient, or kind of what happens, or is it just that the overall demand is lower because the capacity there, the oil price is not there, the revenue is not in the region, What's the play?
Yeah, it's a combination, Jack. I mean, a lower oil price impacts the ability of countries to be able to import. So that manifests in the exchange rate, may be under a bit of pressure. The availability of dollars in some of these markets could get a little bit tighter as well. And generally, the cash cycle can get a little bit tighter. But again, going back to the demand for dairy is so significant in some of these markets, it finds a way through. You know, and it's a period of time now that we have to work through, and you know, we're confident we'll do that. And it's really about managing that risk appropriately. If markets, you know, particularly thinking back to a number of years ago, Angola, for example, was a market that was severely hit for us, and we had a big presence there, huge dependent on oil. But now we have a number of other markets that can replace that. So it's that basket of geographies that will help us to get through this process.
Justin, just to come to you in terms of what David was saying there, obviously he's saying that, yes, oil prices are significantly down and that's impacting on the region and hence demand is down. But he's also making the point that Africa and that whole Middle East area has come through, you know, huge issues before in terms of whether it's human health, in terms of Ebola, or whether it's, you know, again, decreases and ups and downs in oil prices. He's saying we've seen lots of that in the past and we've always come through. I mean, would you agree that kind of this piece is short term and that markets will recover?
I suppose the big thing, Jack, about coronavirus and COVID-19 is the unknown, and we have always been in situations where you have some idea of the end line. And whilst we do see movement at European level and across the world in terms of getting economies reopened, there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and uncertainty creates market volatility. But market volatility creates ups and it creates downs. We're in a downward trend, albeit at the minute. But I think, as David talks about there, what is so important is branded products like Kerrygold, and I suppose centralized marketing businesses like Ornua in terms of the level of protection that it can actually provide. Not least, Jack, as we all know, in terms of the access to working capital that Ornua can provide to co-ops, and that's critically important during periods where product is having to go into storage. And obviously, then the measures introduced by the European Commission around private storage aid and to provide support for that is beneficial to the dairy industry. And look, right from the outside, Jack, what we have called for is quick and sharp responses from the European Commission and from national government to try and limit the long-term impact of what should be a relatively short-term in the greater scale of things, a relatively short-term impact on markets. Because, Jack, everybody is pointing to the market indicators falling off a cliff and whatnot. But of course they are. People are locked up. They actually can't go to the cafes. It's not because of consumer sentiment that people have stopped going to cafes or stopped changed their consumer habits. They've changed their consumption habits because of regulation. And we've never really seen anything like that before. And I suppose the hope is, and the expectation is, that whenever those regulations are relaxed, there will be a built-up tension there among consumers to get back doing what they love to do, go to the cafes, go to the restaurants, and we will see the demand for beef and dairy resume there. And I think that's what David is quite rightly tapping into, and that this is, in the greater scale of things, this is a blip in terms of markets, and that's not to take away from the severity of it, but markets will come back. I think the challenge is we're seeing supports in terms of for dairying there in terms of the PSA, as Phelim O'Neill highlights in this week's paper, the suitability of the measures introduced by the European Commission for the beef sector are really not relevant at all, and there's very little in the way of providing market support through this difficult period for them. But hopefully we will see something coming in that in the near future.
Okay, thanks for that. Pat O'Toole, just to come back to you briefly, the tillage fields in the southeast are probably a little quieter at this time of the year, but the livestock fields, there's some surplus silage coming out, are getting busier. Are we seeing any evidence that there is more people available to drive tractors this year more than other years?
Barry Cassidy reports on that in the paper this week. A lot of people have lost their jobs in many sectors of the economy. People would have experience of driving tractors who've previously worked in the sector or come from farms. There's very little expectation by silage contractors they will have a problem with drivers. Of course, it's very important that people who come in are fully trained, and that they're trained in the safe practice protocols. So we list them this week as well. We've been talking to the farm and forestry contractors. and the IFA, and they're both issuing guidelines. Common sense stuff like, carry disinfectant, disinfect handles on the cabs of the tractors, to wear gloves when you're opening and closing gates, to take and receive instructions over the phone rather than being in direct contact with farmers. So it's important that farmers remember as well, when contractors come to your farm, providing what is regarded as an essential service, that you respect social distancing with them as well, even if you have been starved of company for some time, and the inclination is to go over and shake hands and how's it going. That's the Irish way, but we just have to not do that for the next few weeks. Further to that, I think it's very important that there's a lot of family help at home as well. A lot of families will be attacking their own work and utilising family help, and we'll also have smaller farm helpers where people are not in school. And to remember safety guidelines. It's a very dangerous time on farms, machinery being used, people running fast and working long hours. So if you've got smaller people around especially, be really, really careful and aware of their presence. And let's make this a safe silage season.
Yeah, you're dead right, Pat. And with some of those thoughts in mind, I checked in with FBD's Ciarán Roche, again, just for a reminder on who's allowed to drive these large tractors and what are the safety procedures in place. Listen to what he had to say.
Yeah, tractors and machinery are the main cause of fatalities in Irish farms. So greater care needs to be taken at this time. And especially when we come to harvest time and we're at silage, guys are working long hours. Fatigue sets in. So it's really important, I suppose, before they get stuck into the thick of it, make sure all the machines are well maintained. Anyone who they have operating a machine is competent, skilled at driving that type of machine. Tractors aren't for young people. You have to be at least 16 years of age before you can operate a tractor. If you're on a public road, make sure you have a license as well. And on the farm, it's at least 14. But in relation to silage and machines like that, you'd want to be at least 18 plus before you operate one of those dangerous machines.
Yeah, you're dead right. And I mean, you mentioned the young people piece. I mean, it's the May Bank holiday weekend. There's going to be a lot of kids and young people on farms, I suppose, this weekend. And with the good weather, they're out in the fields, etc. And we've seen pictures in all over the, in terms of, young people around and out on farms. I mean, is there a particular danger, because it's a bank holiday weekend, because the weather is good, of young people getting involved in accidents?
Yeah, definitely. There's more people at home on the farm at the moment, and child safety must be a bigger issue for farmers, and it must be at the forefront of their mind. We've had 5 fatalities already on farms this year. Sadly, 2 of those have been children. And I have 5 safety rules that I'd like to give to every farmer this weekend. Number 1, tractors aren't for kids. Keep children away from dangerous activities, whether it be in relation to livestock, where you have slurry, where farm machinery or silage is going on. Good supervision on the farm is really, really important. Have a safe play area for the child. And again, I think there's an opportunity as well to teach children about the risks and the dangers on farm and do it in a safe environment.
Right, some common sense from FBD's Ciarán Roche. Okay, it's been a busy week. It's been a busy show. I'd like to thank our own contributors here that have joined us this morning, Pat O'Toole, Justin McCarthy and Adam Woods. We also had contributions from Lorcan Allen, Ornua's David Butler and FBD's Ciarán Roche. So thanks to all for taking the time out to join us. Look, we're going to leave you with some imagery from a feature that we carry regularly in the journal called Way Out West. It's the Sligo family. It's the Leonard family from County Sligo that featured this week, and there's some lovely family footage of real family farming. So listen, stay safe, everyone. We'll be back next week. Stay safe and safe farming.